Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at how to play a blaster. A couple of months back I did a video on how to make an archer and I gave a bunch of different build ideas on how to do that for D&D. And today we're just going to be looking at blasters. And just to get this off my chest, as if anybody's watched my videos a lot, you already know I'm not the biggest fan of direct damage spells. I usually prefer more control spells like hypnotic pattern or confusion, or things like just hard control like wall of force cage, spells like that. And the reason is I usually find they're a lot more effective at just controlling the battlefield. You get a lot more bang for your buck out of the spell slot, I usually find. And I've often been very critical of damage spells. However, I must also admit I have been guilty, and I'm sure some of you have made this same mistake, of taking a bunch of just great battlefield control spells and all these like crowd control spells, and then you've got some nice utility spells, and then you get into the fight and you're like, okay, I've got my summon creature that I'm maybe going to be concentrating on, and that's what you do in round one. You cast like summon Shadow Spawn, for example, and then in round two you look at your spell list and you're like, I'm going to cast no, that uses concentration. Man, everything uses concentration. I guess I cast Firebolt. And it's really easy to fall into that trap where we take, where polymorphs and all these other great spells, which are great spells. I'm not saying they aren't. This is my favorite way to play, is taking those type of spells. But then we have nothing to follow it up with. And one nice thing about direct damage spells is that almost none of them require concentration. And so you could be concentrating on that summoned creature in the first round that you cast, and then the next round you could throw out a fireball, and it feels like you're contributing a lot more to the fight than if you're just throwing out a firebolt or a Toll the Dead or something. Now granted, you might have scenarios where you need to really budget your spell slots. Maybe your party's on the clock, or you're doing some sort of you have to finish within a certain amount of time, or you're doing some dungeon run and you don't have a lot of opportunities for long rests or even short rests, in which case you have to rely on those cantrips a lot more in order to kind of budget your spell slots. Because I'm not saying cantrips are terrible either, but if you're only having 2, 3, 4 encounters a day and you're only casting a couple leveled spells a day, you're really just not using anywhere near your full potential. And by having some damage spells in your repertoire, that can really help a lot. The other thing is, damage spells are just kind of fun. Like, I'm not saying that being a support guy isn't fun and doing crowd control. I really appreciate those types of plays, so I like them a lot. But there is something really fun about just grabbing a whole bunch of dice and rolling that fireball and seeing a bunch of 5s and 6s in there and one-shotting the entire room because your party's only level 5 and you just got fireball and you just ended the encounter with one spell. Like, that is really satisfying. And it can be a very fun playstyle, especially if you're a newer player and maybe you don't really know what kinds of creatures are immune to certain types of spells. So you try like a hypnotic pattern, but you find out that things are immune, or you cast hold person, but they weren't really a person or whatever, right? And that kind of experience can be really frustrating. But if you would have cast a scorching ray instead of a hold person, almost guaranteed you were going to do something, assuming you didn't try to scorching ray a red dragon or something like that, which is probably resistant or immune to fire. It's a lot easier though to guess generally that the cold dragon's immune to cold, the fire dragon's immune to fire, the acid dragon's probably immune to acid or resistant to acid, and so it's a lot easier to make those kind of decisions, whereas sometimes you're fighting undead and you're like, are these immune? Are they not? I don't know. Or you're fighting devils and a lot of them are magic resistant and you're like, do I really want to go for an all or nothing spell? At least if I do damage, even if they make this saving throw, I'm doing something even though the damage is terrible. But it's a lot easier to feel good about that decision when at least some damage is getting through and you don't feel like you've wasted your turn and a spell slot. So anyways, even though it's not my favorite style play, I think that there is a lot of real value here. I also think there's a lot of ways to play a good blaster caster. I'm not going to be looking at Light Cleric in this video. Light Cleric's going to get its own video. I want to finish up some more Cleric stuff in the future and coming up. And so I figured I'd give Light Cleric its own video, but I do want to mention that if you're looking to play like a blaster character who doesn't want to only blast, Light Cleric is an excellent choice. You've got things like Fireball on your spell list, you've got some really nice domain features, but then of course you're still a cleric. You've got heals and buffs and a bunch of support spells that you can be casting to help your team out while also having that damage potential. Plus, Spirit Guardians is a pretty awesome damage spell in and of itself. Let's not overlook that. But anyways, the point is that you can build these other types of characters. You could take a Bard, and yeah, the Bard spell list doesn't have a lot of damage in it. But let's say you went Lore Bard, for example, and you take Magical Secrets, and maybe you take Fireball and Counterspell, for example. And then at level 10, maybe you grab like a Cone of Cold or something. And you don't necessarily invest heavily, but you just grab some of the good damage spells to just kind of round out your repertoire a little bit more. And I think there's nothing wrong with that kind of stuff. However, that's not what this video is going to be about. This is more of somebody who wants to be a more dedicated blaster. Because you could play a Conjurer Wizard and do what I said before, maintain concentration on a summon and then throw some other direct damage spells. But, that's kind of its own thing. Today I wanted to look more at some of the preeminent blasters, that at least get the most out of this archetype. Because you could be a blaster who also just decides to summon something every now and then and be the opposite of that Conjurer we just mentioned. And I think that's perfectly fine too. So we're going to be taking a look at 3 different ideas, really 4, but mainly 3. The first one is going to be the Evoker Wizard, because if you're talking blasters and you're talking wizards, Evoker is kind of the gold standard in that department. We're also going to be looking at the Sorcerer, and I don't think the subclass matters as much. Obviously, Draconic Bloodline is going to be an excellent choice if you want to be a blaster, but I feel with Sorcerer, it's more about the metamagics than it is the subclass. And a lot of what you get from an Evoker, you can kind of mirror that with your metamagic choices. Although, like I said, if you want to be a specialist, you can go Dragon Blood and you're going to be pretty good. The last one is going to be the Warlock, who is definitely the weakest of the 3 when it comes to like area effect damage. But we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Eldritch Blast plus Agonizing Blast, which gives you some of the greatest single target blasting damage in the entire game. Especially if you start stacking with things like Hex or a Hexblade's Curse, you can start really piling on a lot of damage. And I think the fact that you can take things like a Repelling Blast or a Grasp of Hadar and allow you to have some like forced movement can also be really good. Because one thing I want to mention before we get too deep into this video is the value of sustained damage. And this is something I've talked about in other videos too. But like a Fireball, for example, does a lot of damage up front and then it's gone, right? And if you want to do more damage, you have to cast more spells. Something like, say, the Spirit Guardian we mentioned earlier, but like Wall of Fire is a good example. Even things like, like a Flaming Sphere or even a Cloud of Daggers. These things can get some real good mileage for you if you have ways of forcing targets back into this area of effect. Something like the Telekinetic feat allows you to like move somebody up to 5 feet, and now you can throw them back into your Cloud of Daggers again and just do that damage all over again. And suddenly what's a pretty mediocre spell in many cases can suddenly start to have some real value for you. And of course Warlocks get a lot of that utility built in, but the others can get some of it too. And you can work with teammates. Maybe a teammate has the Crusher feat or something, and now he can knock guys around, you can start getting some real mileage if you work with your teammates and really like take advantage fully of your spells. But anyways, enough of the preamble. Let's get into the first of these with the Wizard. So, School of Evocation. Obviously at level 2 you're choosing Evoker School. You're going to get 2 abilities. One is the Evocation Savant. All the Savant abilities are kind of trash, honestly, but everybody gets one, so whatever. Well, I guess I might as well say why I think they're trash. It's not that they have no value. Being able to scribe spells for half cost and half time is, it's there. But it's only spells from that particular school. And let's be honest, if you're planning on playing an Evoker, you probably weren't going to just sit around waiting to find Fireball on a scroll and then scribe it into your spellbook. You were probably taking that as soon as you had it available at level 5, right? So the fact that it's evocation spells that you're probably taking anyway really limits the value you're getting. It's half time and half cost, but that's usually not a big deal. And you know, if you're a diviner, getting to scribe diviner spells for half time and half cost, conjurers doing conjuration spells, none of those abilities are great. But anyways, we've already talked about that ability too long. You do get sculpt spells though at level 2, and this ability is amazing, and this is one of the premier reasons of why you would want to play an evoker wizard. So beginning at 2nd level, you can create pockets of relative safety within the effects of your evocation spells. When you cast an evocation spell that affects other creatures that you can see, you can choose a number of them equal to 1 plus the spell's level. The chosen creatures automatically succeed on their saving throws against the spell, and they take no damage if they would normally take half on a successful save. Well, that covers a lot of your evocation spells right there. A lot of them give a saving throw for half. So just to give a quick example to explain fully how this works. You're in combat, your party's engaged in hand-to-hand fighting with the enemies. You rolled a 2 on your initiative score, so you're way down to the bottom. And now you wanted to throw out a fireball, but all your friends are there. But the evoker can say, well, I can designate 1 creature plus an additional creature per level of spell. Fireball's level 3, that's going to be 4 creatures you can designate to automatically pass their saving throw, which would normally take half damage. But in this case, it specifically says, if a save would allow them to take half damage, they take no damage instead. So you can designate with your fireball 4 of your allies to take just no damage. And you can just throw that fireball right into the midst of all the melee, and you know, you don't have to worry about it. This is a great ability, honestly. That's one of the problems we often have with AoE damage or area effect damage, is that it has friendly fire, and then we end up being like Longshanks in Braveheart, you know, like, send in the archers. Sir, won't we hit our own men? We'll hit theirs as well. We have reserves, you know. Your party might not feel that same way about it, though. They might not think, hey, we don't actually have reserves unless we make up new characters, so quit fireballing us. Well, you don't have to fireball them now. Potent Cantrip, level 6. So starting level 6, your damaging cantrips affect even creatures that avoid the brunt of the effect. When a creature succeeds on a saving throw against your cantrip, the creature takes half the cantrip's damage, if any, but suffers no additional effect from the cantrip. This ability is okay. Like I said, there are times when you want to throw out a lot of cantrips, so that helps. The problem is, it's only against cantrips that allow a saving throw. If you're using something like a firebolt, there is no saving throw, it's just a hit roll, and you're not getting any added benefit. So while it's kind of similar to like the clerics who get, like, you know, they either get the divine strike where they get to add damage to their weapon attacks, or they get to add their wisdom bonus to their cantrips, you only get to do that, you know, if they were getting a saving throw for half damage. However, it's not that bad. There are things like Toll the Dead, which is an excellent damage cantrip, and if they make a saving throw, they take no damage. Well, now they'll take half still. And it's not limited to evocation spells, it's only limited to cantrips. So that is pretty decent. You've got some nice flexibility there. At least something's getting through. But again, it's only cantrips that allow a saving throw for half, so yeah. Level 10, Empowered Evocation. Beginning at 10th level, you can add your intelligence modifier to 1 damage roll of any wizard evocation spell you cast. So this actually even more closely mirrors the cleric, where now you get to add your intelligence bonus to the damage of your spell, but unlike the clerics, you can do this to any evocation spell. So you are limited to the school, but you're not limited to cantrip damage, which is pretty nice. It means if you throw like a fireball or something, you can add your intelligence mod to one of those die. I might as well mention the magic missile ruling. According to Jeremy Crawford, we've all been playing magic missile wrong for decades, apparently. We all thought, you know, if you threw 3 missiles, you rolled 3 die 4. But he says, no, you're supposed to roll 1 and then multiply that by the number of missiles, which makes this ability a lot better if you're casting magic missile, because now you can add your intelligence modifier to that one and only die and then multiply it by all your missiles. So if you upcast it and had 7 missiles, for example, you get to add that 5 intelligence bonus to that 1 dice and then multiply that damage for all 7 missiles. That suddenly makes your spell a lot better. So, definitely worth mentioning at least. But in general, it's, basically an extra die or maybe a little more than 1 die worth of damage. It's not nothing, so whatever. More blasty is better. Level 14, Overchannel. Starting at 14th level, you can increase the power of your simpler spells. When you cast a wizard spell of 1st through 5th level that deals damage, note it doesn't have to be an evocation spell, it just has to deal damage and be from level 1 to 5. You can deal maximum damage with that spell. The first time you do so, you suffer no adverse effect. If you use this feature again before finishing a long rest, you take 2d12 necrotic damage for each level of the spell. So maybe don't do that with like a chain lightning, for example. Each time you use this feature again before finishing a long rest, the necrotic damage per spell level increases by 1d12. This damage ignores resistance and immunity. So if you threw a fireball out, for example, and we're using this for the second time without resting, or whatever, you're looking at 6d12 necrotic damage. That's pretty bad. If you use another fireball and use this ability, you're looking at 9d12 necrotic damage, and you're probably looking at a dead wizard. So this really kind of is a once per long rest ability, but it is really good. I mean, doing maximum damage already or automatically is pretty spectacular. And basically that's it for the Evoker Wizard. That's essentially what you're getting. But I do feel like, especially Sculpt Spell is awesome. Getting to add a bit more damage to your spells at level 10 is by all means a pretty good thing. And being able to do maximum damage, even if it's only once per long rest, is also pretty good. And yeah, you're getting that at 14th level, but it's a pretty strong ability. Anyways, on to the Sorcerer. And I want to specifically mention, I've seen people do this, and I've kind of fallen into this trap myself sometimes, where we decide we're going to go, let's say, Draconic Bloodline. We take fire, for example, right? And then we just load up on all fire spells. You probably don't need Burning Hands by the time you're high enough to cast Fireball. They're very similar, and Fireball is just way better. So don't be afraid to drop some of those other spells and maybe pick up some decent utility spells. The problem with Sorcerers, unless you're looking at some of the new ones from Tashes, for example, but in general, Sorcerers have very few spells known. And it's very easy to fall into this trap of just taking Burning Hands for level 1 spells, Scorching Ray for level 2 spells, Fireball for your level 3 spells, etc., etc. And just devote everything to blasting and then realize you really don't have anything else. And when you're fighting fire immune stuff, you're very limited as to what you can do. Don't forget, you can always change spells out when you level up and stuff. And just don't, even if you want to be predominantly a blaster, maybe take a few other spells here and there too, just to be safe. I do think that things get a lot better for Sorcerers if you're looking at, say, the 2 new ones from Tashes. Although they don't really bring much in the way of blasting, but at least, some of them have some decent spells on spell list. Like the Aberrant Mind has Hunger of Dar and Evard's Black Tentacles, which both kind of straddle a line between damage spells and crowd control, which is really nice when you can combine both into one. And yeah, the damage isn't super high, but again, Evard's Black Tentacles is just persistent damage. Things get caught in the tentacles, and every round they're taking that damage. And that can be really, really good. So as far as the Sorcerer metamagics, there's a few that really, really stand out. I really like Careful Spell, and the reason is because, here, let's just read it. When you cast a spell that forces other creatures to make a saving throw, you can protect some of those creatures from the spell's full force. To do so, you must spend 1 sorcery point and choose a number of those creatures up to your Charisma modifier, minimum of 1 creature. A chosen creature automatically succeeds on a saving throw against the spell. Now, this isn't as good as Sculpt Spell, because these ones automatically succeed on the saving throw, but they are still going to take half damage if it's a damaging spell. So to use the previous example, let's say you're a sorcerer instead of a wizard. With that 2 initiative, you throw your fireball at the party, and then you're like, yeah, you guys all get to take half damage automatically. I mean, it's better than making them make saving throws and possibly fail and take full damage, but it's definitely not as good as Sculpt Spell was. Still, it's not nothing, and one sorcery point is fairly cheap for sorcerers, so, you know, not bad. Not bad at all, actually. Another good choice is Empowered Spell. When you roll damage for a spell, you can spend one sorcery point to re-roll a number of the damage die equal to your charisma modifier, minimum of 1. You must use the new rolls. You can use Empowered Spell even if you've already used a different metamagic option during the casting of the spell. And this is one thing I really like, is that you can stack it with another one. So maybe you decide to quicken cast out that fireball instead and use it as a bonus action. You can also empower it, and normally you can't. Like, you can't twin a spell and heighten it at the same time, for example, right? But with Empowered Spell, again, only one sorcery point. You get to reroll a number of dice, equal to charisma mod, and it's something you can choose to do after you've seen the dice. So if you roll a bunch of 5s and 6s, you just don't use it. If you rolled a bunch of 1s and 2s and maybe a couple 5s and 6s, you're like, okay, I'm going to re-roll, maybe a +3 charisma mod. I'm going to re-roll these 3 dice, and it can really significantly boost the damage on your spells. And it is fairly cheap, which is why I like it. 1 sorcery point's about as good as you're going to get there. As far as others, Quicken Spell we've already mentioned. When you cast a spell that has a casting time of 1 action, you can spend 2 sorcery points to change the casting time to 1 bonus action for this casting. I like Quicken Spell quite a bit. I like it even more on like melee focused characters where you could quicken cast a buff on yourself and then still attack, like say a Paladin, Sorcerer, multiclass, for example. Or, as we're going to talk about in a moment, the Warlock, Sorcerer, multiclass, where you cast an Eldritch Blast while quicken casting another Eldritch Blast. Eldritch Blast is great. Casting 2 of them per turn is even better. You can find a lot of value there, and just being able to change your action economy around can be very, very helpful. Maybe you had something that takes a bonus action, so you don't want to quicken it this round, but maybe you had another spell that takes normally an action. You could quicken cast it and then do something else. You can't cast another leveled spell, but you could throw like a cantrip or something like that, And if you're looking to just drop a bunch of damage in one round, that's not a bad play. So I do like Quicken Spell. I also like Subtle Spell. When you cast a spell, you can spend 1 sorcery point to cast it without any somatic or verbal components. The reason I like this is because now there's no way for enemy spellcasters to identify you're casting a spell, meaning they can't counterspell you. And being able to make your spells uncounterable for 1 sorcery point, that is a huge, huge value. If you're looking at single target, things like Heightened Spell and Twin Spell are really good metamagics, but I don't think they really fit this playstyle as much. Heightened Spell is only giving 1 creature disadvantage on the saving throw, and if you're hitting like 8 creatures with your fireball, affecting one of them isn't anywhere near as valuable. It's probably just empowering the spell and doing more damage to all 8 creatures, right? And Twin Spell, again, if you're using things like a Finger of Death or Disintegrate, it can be pretty nice in those cases. But, it's a lot of sorcery points in that case for a spell that still allows a saving throw for half. And yeah, now you get to hit 2 creatures with it, which is okay. But, it's actually pretty good. But, in general, those aren't exactly my favorite spells to be casting anyways. So, while you might want to consider them, they're not my top choices. Anyways, that brings us to Warlock. Again, with Warlock, I don't know if the subclass is a big deal necessarily, but would be really, really negligent if we didn't at least mention Pact of the Fiend. Again, you have Fireball, you got things like Burning Hands, you got some nice blasty type spells on that spell list, so it's at least worth mentioning that might be a good choice to go with. The main thing though with the Warlock, of course, is what I already hinted at earlier: forced movement with Eldritch Blast. This and Agonizing Blast. So Agonizing Blast is already going to boost the damage on your spell. It's really going to allow you to do a lot of good damage to one particular target. And yes, as you level up, Eldritch Blast gets multiple bolts, which means you could hit multiple targets. But especially if you're looking to stack it with like a hex spell or a Hexblade's Curse ability or something like that, it's really going to shine against like that big boss type guy, and you just want to like blast him from a distance and really bring some damage to your party, as well as possibly force movement. Like I said, maybe let's say you went Pact of the Fiend, for example. You also have Wall of Fire in your spell list, and as we already mentioned, you know, you cast your Wall of Fire right in front of something. Fire is burning outward, that thing takes damage on its turn, right? Then it decides it wants to come through the Wall of Fire. But then you just Repelling Blast and push it back through the Wall of Fire again, where it now has to take even more damage to come through the Wall of Fire again. And suddenly that spell that, you know, was doing some okay damage, but wasn't really a wall, let's be honest, it doesn't keep anything out. Suddenly that spell starts looking so much better because we're able to do that damage over and over again. You can stack this with teammate abilities. Maybe somebody has like Spirit Guardians or a Sickening Radiance or something, and you're able to like keep pushing creatures back into these area effects and just doing that damage over and over again. Plus the damage from your Agonizing Blast, of course, or from your Eldritch Blast. So I really think that it's quite solid. Now, of course, the problem with Warlocks that we always run into is you have such limited spell slots that often I find I don't really take damage spells on a Warlock. I mean, maybe Fireball if I'm playing Pact of the Fiend, but in general, I don't take any damage spells. I just rely on Eldritch Blast, and that's my nuke spell. Because if I've only got a couple spell slots to use on any given encounter, I'm probably looking for something more powerful, which is probably going to require concentration, honestly. And then I'm going to be just following that up with Eldritch Blast. And unlike, say, sorcerers or wizards, Eldritch Blast does so much damage that it doesn't really feel like you're wasting your turn when you throw an Eldritch Blast, as opposed to like a Firebolt, for example, where the damage is pretty mediocre, especially as you start getting to like mid levels. Like when you're like level 11 or 12 and you're doing like 3d10 damage and you roll an average of like, you know, 12 or 13 damage on your Firebolt to one target and it required a hit roll, it really doesn't feel like you had good value on your turn. But, you know, that Eldritch Blast is doing double that and possibly pushing things around the battlefield on top of that, and maybe stacking with some hex damage on top of that, and so it starts looking a lot better. So finally, like I said, let's talk about the Warlock Sorcerer multiclass. Usually, for this particular build, you're looking at 2, maybe 3 levels of Warlock at the most, and then all the rest is going to go Sorcerer. We want to have a lot of sorcery points. We might want to be able to get like a cool familiar with Pact of the Chain, or maybe we want to be able to get a bunch of ritual spells. Of course, we might go Pact of the Tome, which is why we might want to take 3 levels, but it's really not necessary. 2 is going to give us our couple of invocations, one of which is going to be Agonizing Blast, and possibly Repelling Blast as well, which is another great addition if we're looking to really get some value out of our Eldritch Blast. And then, like I said, for the most part, we're going to be, you know, either casting a spell, maybe using a Quicken Cast to cast as a bonus action, and then using an Eldritch Blast, or even potentially casting an Eldritch Blast with a Quickened Eldritch Blast. It means that we don't have to rely on Hex or Hexblade's Curse as much either, and Hexblade's Curse is only going to be available if you went Hexblade anyways, which you might not have if you wanted to get Fireball, right? So it does really free up a lot of those other options, where now we can, you know, Quicken Cast something with a sorcery spell while still being able to bring out even more burst in that first round of combat with our, you know, Eldritch Blast spell. And honestly, like, we could have put this in as one of our archery builds, but I kind of wanted to keep it to a pure archery build for that video, you know, not start bringing in funky caster builds. But when you're looking at just doing a lot of damage to one target, this really is one of the best caster options you have. You know, you're not going to be taking Sharpshooter on a caster or anything like that. You don't have Great Weapon Mastery or any of the other like big damage multipliers that are available to some of these other classes and other fighting style options. But you've got Agonizing Blast, which essentially just doubles the damage your Eldritch Blast is doing, more or less. So anyways, I want to talk briefly about feats as well, and what feats I think really fit in well with this playstyle. A very obvious one is Warcaster. I don't think that it's quite as necessary if you're going to just be staying back and nuking stuff a lot as it is on a lot of other casters, but it's still just an excellent feat for any caster to have. And you might want to take advantage of it if you're, especially if you're going like with the Warlock or the Warlock Sorcerer multi-class idea, because if somebody does move past you and you get an opportunity attack, you could just use a cantrip instead and Eldritch Blast them in the face. And that can have some value. But if you're standing far back, you may not have a lot of opportunity attack chances. And so I don't think this is as big a deal as it would be on a lot of other casters that I recommend. But I still, it's still worth mentioning. However, an excellent option, one that I would definitely consider, would be Spell Sniper, allowing you to double the range on a lot of your attacks like this, as well as to ignore everything up to full cover. And especially if you're in a campaign where your DM likes to give things cover and do sneaky tactics like that, this starts to really shine. But even if you're just, using that Eldritch Blast we mentioned and just doubling the range on that, and maybe taking an Eldritch Spear to double the range again, crazy as that might be, now you've got a really, really potent long-range damage dealer. The Spell Sniper in general is just a really good feat for casters. Another obvious choice would be Elemental Adept. I especially like this option if you went with, say, Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer, and you did want to take a bunch of, fire spells or cold spells or whatever else. Then just to get a little more oomph out of things, you could take this, and it also helps you to ignore a lot of like resistances and stuff like that, which can help your spells to get a lot more value. Especially if all you took were fire spells, you might want to take that. Of course, one of the best feats on any sort of a caster, Alert. The +5 to your initiative helps you to avoid situations like we mentioned earlier where you have that 2 initiative and now, you want it to hit people with your nice big AoE spell, but now the fight's already going and everybody's all mixed up in this general scrum and you're like, why did I have to roll a 1, At least with Alert, if you get a decent number and maybe you've got decent dexterity as well, you are a caster, you probably have some dexterity. But even let's say you have a +2 dex, combined with the +5 Alert, suddenly you're rolling that initiative at a +7, and the chances of you being able to get your spells off early in the fight before all the enemies have managed to engage your teammates starts looking a lot higher. Now granted, if you went with, say, the Evoker Wizard, it's not as big of a deal because, like I said, you can sculpt your spells around your allies, and so if you drop a fireball on them, they're not going to care. But in the other cases, this starts to look a lot better. A lot better than nuking your allies. Although I've been in campaigns where people took nuking their allies to kind of an art form and would always find excuses to hit each other with that shatter spell or that fireball spell. And I'm like, oh, sorry, I hit them too. Yes. Good old Longshanks maneuver again. Anyways, another option is one that I mentioned earlier. This is one of the ones we got from Tasha's, which is the Telekinesis feat. Being able to move somebody and force them into, your spell effects when they're that flaming sphere that's just burning round after round starts looking a lot better. You can start getting a lot more mileage from those types of spells. And it is only a bonus action, which is pretty nice as well. I don't like it as much on the Warlock or even the Sorcerer because I'm probably using a lot of my Sorcerer actions to, quick and cast stuff. And the Warlock already has built-in movement to Eldritch Blast if they want to take those invocations. So I don't think they need it as much. But if you're playing a pure Sorcerer or a pure Wizard, I think that it starts to have some real value. It gives you a nice bonus action option where you're like, I got that spell going. I'm just going to move this guy 5 feet because that's the limit of it, it's 5 feet. But, I can force him into an effect or I can force him into something else. And it can be pretty good. I don't necessarily know if I love it as much as some of the others, but it's definitely worth mentioning. It's also, before we wrap up here, I wanted to say, it's hard to go wrong with 2 levels of fighter just for action surge. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but you know how we mentioned that you can't cast 2 leveled spells in the same turn? Really, you can't cast 2 level spells unless you have action surge. And then you can. You could literally fireball, then action surge, and then fireball again. And then if you were that Warlock Sorcerer we mentioned, you could even quicken cast and cast an Eldritch Blast on top of all that. So if you're looking to like really get some big burst damage, it might be worth considering. Now granted, every level of fighter you take is just going to delay you getting those good Warlock or Sorcerer or better yet Wizard spells. And so that's definitely something you might want to think about. It might be something you want, it might not be. But, you know, being a wizard in plate mail and throwing out fireballs 2 in a turn sometimes is pretty cool. And you could even start fighter and have constitution and saving throws. That's just going to push your spellcasting back even further, though. So I'm not saying that that's the go-to move. Just throwing it out there for your consideration. But anyways, that's basically everything I had. Hopefully you like this video. Like I said, I do often kind of trash damage dealing spells, and that's not entirely fair of me because, like I said, they do have their time and place too. And I'm sure I know for a fact I've made the mistake of having way too many concentration spells before and not having anything else that I could do. And because I could only concentrate on one spell at a time, I end up falling back on just throwing out cantrips. And like I said, sometimes that's okay. But sometimes you're getting like 3 encounters a day and you've got 15 spell levels available, or spell slots of all your various levels available. You know, you could have been casting something good. So, you know, let's give some damage a bit of love here too. It's not all bad. But anyways, that's everything I have. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. Tell me experiences of blasters and caches that you've made, or how much fun they were for you to play. Because honestly, they are a lot of fun. So, you know, I don't have any ill will towards people who want to cast a lot of those spells. I completely understand it. I just think that a lot of other times, other spells can be more effective. But a lot of that comes from just like playing the game a lot and learning what's resistant to what or what's immune to what. Because like I said, casting a hold person on somebody who's immune to a hold person sucks a lot worse than hitting somebody with a scorching ray and then kind of rolling low damage. at least you did something on your turn, besides, you know, wasted a spell slot. But anyways, that's everything. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.